5.13 on page 80, is that correct? And that's bringing that forward, Chris?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so that's I guess we're trying to support getting the development underway there, and so there was so what we've tried to do is bring just a little bit of bring the money forward and plus top it up based on our estimates that we've got, so we can get that underway in the coming year and help them get that off the ground.
And to compensate that, you've just done some tweaking with Akatori and moving to year three rather than year two.
Yeah. So we've got the designs for that are all done, so it's all basically ready to go. So it won't have a significant impact on our delivery capability either.
And that is with the Akatori urban growth. What are we exactly talking there? What are you putting in pipes? Is that what it is?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got a few phases which will. Two phases of installing water pipes to support the Kiki Whenua, which will then actually also set up for Kakatangata as well.
Right, but up at Akatori, what were you doing?
Country, sorry. What have we got in the
It's
country?
water. It's a water main as well.
Sorry, I see. That's in the previous one.
If I could jump in and help out through the chair, I think our Chief Infrastructure Officer has confused the two items together.
Sorry.
So we're
Yes,
proposing to bring money forward out of year 7 of the Akautri program and into the Kiki Whenua program to compensate for the change rather than increasing and leaving the other budget as is.
Sorry, that's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what exactly are you doing up at Akautri?
That was through you, Mr. Chair. I think that the reference to a kotiri in the previous item is in relation to some business case work for transport upgrades in the kotiri, so they've just been deferred a touch to allow the ring road to come forward.
Okay, all right. I'll go to you, Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in regards to the Kiki Whenua 5.13, it talks about the water main budget. There was a submission from the owners of Sanitarium, the Mapoli Family Trust, that mentioned about their bore and whether that was a proposition worth exploring.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
I think
I'll
go through the mayor.
Mike Moynihan.
Yeah.
Mike Monaghan, Group Manager for Three Waters. I'm happy to answer that question. Thank you, Councillor. The bore that was in question from the submissions, we would need to do some significant investigations to make sure that that bore had both the yield and met the sanitary borehead conditions for the drinking water standards before we could do any work around that proposition, if you like.
Would that just be part of exploring and
exploration work? Yeah.
Okay, that's all I had, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, just back to you, Cam and David and Chris. Entrance program adjustments. What is that? Roxburgh Crescent.
Yeah, I might take that one. So when we initially brought the budgets together for the LTP, we had a program sitting there for Roxburgh Crescent. There was another resolution passed by council. We added a new program in. It is for the same piece of work. So all we're wanting to do there is remove the duplicate piece of work out and slightly correct the budget in year 3, I think it is off the top of my head without looking at paper.
Okay, and the data refresh and a decrease in that's on page 82, 5.16. Can I just get in? What exactly is happening there?
We've taken an opportunity to utilise some savings from the current year and transfer it into that space. The program of work was all due to occur in year 1. As we've utilised some of those savings in the current year, we don't need that full budget next year.
Okay. Same with Tutanganui. Is it just a deferral?
Yes, that's correction of timing with the capital works occurring after the business case.
Right. Okay. Water's translation revenue in and out. So that's 518, is it?
Yes, that's cost neutral to council.
Okay. And around growth planning, technical assessments increase, can I just get an understanding what's happening there? Is it stormwater?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. That's where through the district plan changes and the future development strategy, we're seeing, significant increased demand for those technical assessments around infrastructure, particularly transport and stormwater. There's also requirements for water and wastewater, but we're comfortable that we can accommodate those within existing resources and budgets. Initially, the team came up with some budgets that were a bit bigger than this, but we've worked hard to look at how we can use existing budgets in strategic planning and existing budgets in infrastructure to provide this technical support. But we are still seeing, as I said, significant demand on those technical assessments to support rezoning. So this is some additional money to make sure that we've got the information we need to advance those rezoning proposals.
Okay, thank you. And just, I'm quite happy to move these, but I just, with the seismic deferrals, 514, can I just get an understanding what you were planning there? Bryce?
Yes, I'm probably best to speak to this one. We've been given another 4 years to the 15-year timeline. So we've taken the opportunity to look at the program, kept it in the same order that you prioritised, but just look to spread it over an extra 4 years.
Okay, cool. All right, I think we're all clear on those. And I'm sorry, councillor, there's quite a lot there, and it's just worthwhile just understanding exactly what's there. So, look, I'm happy to move 511 to 519, excluding 514 at this stage, and we'll come back and do a catch-all at the end. If I could look for a seconder. Thank you, councillor Dennison. Again, thanks to the officers for just having a look at everything that needs to be done there. I think with the local water done well funding changes, I think it's worth noting our first tranche of funding all got spent basically under the ground with stormwater evaluations. So, but it was the tranche 2 where we were told where it sort of had to go, and it wasn't really in water. I think it's quite wise that we perhaps do hedge our bets there and look to get some funding changes into the waters, but also carrying on the good work of the original projects that were put forward. So I'm happy to move that, and there being no comments, we will vote, please. That's passed, 16 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right, we've got recommendation 2E.
This is an additional alternative, so we've got two, the one in the papers and the one that's Councillor Barrett.
Okay. All right, so we've got recommendation 2E, which is around that Council instruct the Chief Executive to prepare a draft of the final LTP consideration by Council, and that it incorporates an updated corporate emissions reduction target of a 2034 interim target of a 60% reduction compared to the 2015/16 baseline. And there's also an additional recommendation from Councillor Barrett and Councillors Ballin that Council set annual targets for organisational and for citywide greenhouse gas emissions that are consistent with the multi-year goals for, I'm presuming, the above emissions reduction target. Okay. Are there any questions? I might just ask officers, is this doable? Do you see any problems with this?
I was hopeful that it's gone a bit quicker than what we thought. I was hopeful that Adam Jarvis, our principal climate change advisor, was going to be in the room. But I had a quick chat with him this morning. The one thing he cautioned about the second resolution around the annual targets is, depending what happens in any one year, we can either have a large upswing or a downswing if there was significant wet periods or dry periods that might influence the energy or activities we're undertaking, and that could that could signal to the community that we're significantly off track within that particular year. So that's just what, obviously it's a long-term game, reducing climate change emissions. So Adam, I've just been attempting to paraphrase your advice that you gave to me earlier this morning, which you may want to jump in and add to in terms of some of the considerations around an annual target.
Apologies, Mr. Mayor, elected members. Not sure exactly what was said right there, but if you recall last year in October, when we presented the most recent emissions inventory, emissions had declined significantly, but our view was that the majority of the impact there was due to the unseasonably wet year. So we reduced emissions, but this wasn't necessarily reflective of a long-term trend. So just bearing that in mind, an annual target is likely to be achieved or not achieved due to factors entirely out of our control, and that really the multi-year trend is what ultimately matters in terms of achieving our long-term ambitions.
So previously, how have we communicated to the community and kept ourselves on target with this? Because we've always put a longer-term target of reductions, but surely do we have annual sort of measurements?
So we currently report emissions annually in roughly October, once data becomes available. We would continue to do that. But these are presented in the context to the community of this is an annual check-in, and we don't tend to say each year we've achieved or not achieved a particular target, which, as I note, could be merely an annual fluctuation rather than a true long-term reduction in emissions.
Okay, great. All right, well look, I'm happy to move 2E1, that the council instruct the chief executive to prepare a final LTP for consideration by council and incorporates an updated corporate emissions reduction target of a 2034 interim target of 60% reduction compared to the 2015-16 baseline. A second, thank you, Councillor Harpiter. So, councillors, I think we do need to move the target. We've done well to date. I keep hearing the low-hanging fruit's been taken consistently by officers, and that's probably quite true. But it does. We do have to have a target in there. I'm a little bit. We'll come to the additional recommendation. We'll do that separately, and I'll leave my comments to that one when we get to it. So we'll vote on the first one first, and if there's any other comments. There being none, we'll vote on 2E1. And that has passed 16 votes for and none against. All right, and the second one there is 2E2. It's around setting annual targets for organisational and for citywide greenhouse gas emissions consistent with the multi-year goals for emissions reduction. Councillor Barrett, I'll go to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. Just briefly on this, certainly endorse the vote that we've just taken around setting appropriate targets. What we're asking for here is just that we do bring that into an annual focus as per submission 1187 and others that wanted us to be more active in the climate space. This is a good practical step that we can do just in terms of measuring that and reporting on that in a more structured way and in a more timely way. I do hear the officer's comments around, there being externalities and factors that are beyond our direct control, but we regularly report on housing, population, jobs, GDP, et cetera, all these things on quarterly or annual time steps. There's no reason why we shouldn't bring our emissions into that same kind of focus. We've had some conversations earlier on about being able to be in a strong position to compare emissions with, per capita, per GDP, et cetera. So it really just brings it all into a more appropriate time frame looking at things on an annual basis. Yes, there'll be some context around why things have moved in a particular way in a particular year, but I think we would all acknowledge that we're moving into quite a critical time in terms of our climate response as a city and as a nation, and this puts it in a clearer context in terms of making those measurements and reporting on an annual basis so that we have, I guess, an appropriate level of effort and focus on this particular area across what we do around our climate response for and in concert with the community. So on that basis, would ask for your support to take this approach to set an annual target that is complementary to those longer term targets.
Councillor Zabellin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I am really supportive of having a target to aim for, and we've had really good success with our previous target, but we currently don't have a roadmap for how we might achieve a future target. So identifying some milestones could better inform our activities and our planning and decision making in that space. Annual targets would be the only kind of real roadmap of stepping stones that we have at this point to how we might achieve the overall target, and it would give us that sort of actual and current sense of achievement of progress or otherwise, and that's important. There are swings in events that are outside our control, and they're still worth noting because it gives us insight and the community insight to the types of things that do impact our emissions despite the activities or decisions that we might make. And noting that the primary reason that we achieved our 30% reduction target ahead of time was due to reducing landfill emissions, which was outside of our control and influence. So I'm supportive of having an annual target to give context to the annual reporting that comes through about the types of things that impact these figures, whether they're weather events or complexities of the ETS or whatever it is. Just solidifying up our target with roadmaps of how we're planning to get there or where we'd need to be able to achieve that target just seems to illuminate that, even while we may acknowledge that there are things that can come out of the blue and blow up our chances of achieving a target that year, doesn't mean having the target is necessarily fruitless in and of itself. So please urge you to think about this and support having greater clarity on how we're progressing with our emissions reduction activities over time. Thank you.
Could I just ask a question before I come to you, Councillor Dennison, of officers? We already have a biannual sustainability report which does highlight what we're doing, is that right?
Yeah, we do, at a high level across a range of environmental sustainability topics. It includes our work on carbon. One thought, actually just sent a text message from the Chief Executive, was whether there is an expectation that these annual targets would be reported back to the Council for approval, or whether we'd simply take the 10-year target and divide it by 10.
And we already do an annual emissions reduction report.
Correct. As Adam said, we report annually on our corporate emissions and our citywide emissions against the 10-year target. If we set annual targets, then we'd be reporting that annually, obviously against the 10-year target, but also the annual target. But it's also be good to know whether that annual target is set by the council or it's just 10 year one divided by 10.
Yeah, okay. All right. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like you, a question, if I could direct it through you to the officers and then maybe to the mover. That currently we're doing annual targets for us as an organisation, or you might call it corporate as far as the last recommendation. This one extends for and city-wide greenhouse gas emissions. Are we measuring at all a city-wide emissions, and what influence would we have to shift the dial on that for any meaningful benefit to have the report?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we currently report citywide emissions annually. Bearing in mind that not all of the data for that citywide emissions is released annually, so there's some interpolation that occurs where we're taking data, in one case, from 2020, so 4 years ago, and taking trends and building it that way. So we're reporting it annually. As far as influence that council has, it's a very broad, big question to answer. We talked about this during the annual report. But essentially, citywide emissions are primarily governed by the emissions trading scheme. The amount of credits that the government releases is essentially how many emissions are released in ETS covered sectors nationally. So a lot of what council does, you can view it as decreasing emissions locally, but then the consequential impact of that is a reduction in the price of credits, which means an increase in the amount of emissions somewhere else. So, however, you also are in a position where a lot of what council does is make it easier for the community to reduce their emissions and cheaper. So let's say through the provision of a cycleway or a new bus network or something of that nature, we're making it easier for individuals to reduce the amount of money that they are effectively having to pay through the ETS at the pump, let's say. So that's one element. The other part is in non-ETS covered sectors, there is no such mechanism in place nationally, so we can have a potentially more direct impact on citywide emissions, let's say via agriculture, if we wanted to take steps along those lines in terms of planning, notwithstanding our actual ability to pull levers that influence those. Does that cover you?
Yep, I'm happy with the answer. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Unless the mover wants to add with the rationale behind incorporating a citywide target. But you can do that and write a reply, but I'm happy, thank you.
All right. There being no other, before I come back to write a reply, I'm a little bit uncertain about this because we've just signed off unanimously on the overall targets. I don't know a lot about the ETS trading scheme, to be really honest, and I'm just a little bit wary about signing ourselves up to something there which we don't have a lot of bearing over, certainly on the citywide. Absolutely okay with the organisational stuff because that's something we can control. And I'd hate to think that this gets used against us in some way when we are doing some good work in this space. So I'm still unsure whether I'd support this for those reasons. All right, I come back to you, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to officers for responses to those questions and to the Chief Executive for getting a text across to clarify some things. I'd be quite open to officers' advice in terms of what would be appropriate for breaking that down across time. The simplest way, obviously, would be just dividing by 10 and being at 6% a year for the organizational ones. In terms of, I don't see this as a reason to create problems for ourselves, etc. But I think there is every reason for us to be measuring things and reporting on things in a time frame that people actually hear and respond to appropriately. And I think, frankly, when most people see, oh, we need to do something by 2034, it just goes out, goes out the other ear. There's no real comprehension of that, whereas I think if we bring it into an annual lens and say, well, this year we're trying to knock off 6%, next year we're trying to knock off 6%, that gives it a much clearer and more distinct message to the community about what we as an organization are trying to do and what would be appropriate for the broader community to do. Absolutely, those broader community emissions are with the community in terms of how that response happens over time. But I think, again, it is helpful for us to take targets like 2034, to take targets like net zero 2050, and actually give those to people in annual time steps and time steps that they can actually think about and respond to as they may or may not choose to appropriately. So I see this as a simple way to have a clear message for the community to respond to. And look, we can see how it goes for the next few years. And, if we need to further refine our approach to target setting and monitoring here, that's fine. But I see this as a very sensible, low-risk approach to improving our communications and potentially our performance around emissions response. So I would ask colleagues for their support on that basis. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We will vote on 2E2. And that has failed for a lack of majority, 8-all. All right. We will now move to recommendation 2F, please. And these are recommendations from various committees, and there is a number of them here, and this is around Council instructing the Chief Executive to prepare a draft of the final LTP for consideration by Council, and that incorporates any other recommendations from committee as follows. And it includes the increase to the Housing Advice Centre sector lead grant funding by 21,131 for the 24-25 financial year and adjusted for inflation in future years. Second is increased creative sound sector lead grant of an additional 68,000 for 24-25 and inflation adjusted for future years. And the last one there, I can just pull that up please, is that Palmerston City Council develop a new citywide stormwater strategy prior to the development of the 2027 future development strategy. We've got two that are around youth wellbeing and the food security and resilience policy, but we have some recommendations in our document to go through. So we'll just deal with the first three. And I'm very happy to move the last one around the Palmerston City Council developing a stormwater strategy prior to the development of the 2027 future development strategy. I'll look for a second to thank you, Councillor Harpiter. And I'm not going to move the other two, but if there is somebody, I've got Councillor Johnson.
I'm not going to move them either, but I would like to make a comment about them,
Yes.
if I may.
Yes.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm not quite sure the procedure here. Am I speaking or not?
We're in C. It's up to the chair. Yeah, we're in C, and it's up to the chair. I'm allowing you to speak.
All right, thank you. I'm not moving the first two. Councillors will see that I've signalled a recommendation to increase the Strategic Priority Grant Fund. But as a general principle, I support organisations applying through the SPG for funding, not for us making individual calls which are subject to political influence on funding of individual organisations. And as a council, we've tried to stick to that when organisations come to us to ask for money, we try and get them into the pools of money that we already have. Sometimes there are exceptions if they come to us in between years, but in these cases, I would suggest to elected members that rather than putting forward individual increases for individual organisations that are not subject to any contestable nature at this point, that would be much better to refer all of those into the strategic priority grant or perhaps some other contestable council funding so that the decision can be made out of the political arena. So for that reason, I'm not going to put these forward, although I would hope that perhaps these organisations would apply through strategic priority grants, and if we're able to increase that fund, there would be some capacity there. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, along very similar lines to Councillor Johnson, the Creative Sound sector leave application particularly I struggle with, because that's an organisation very connected with and absolutely see the value of what they do. But I support the outline that Councillor Johnson has given about our strategic direction here, in the hope that the SPG funding does receive your support. So noting that we're leaving £100,000 on the table there in advance of that debate. I'd also say that I found the Creative Sounds request to be a little problematic and the reason I want to see that referred through SPG is SPG provides an opportunity for us to align funding requests against our strategic direction. The Creative Sounds application reflected a position that had been funded through another body, which gave effect to their strategic direction. And for me, that's a gap that I don't think we should automatically step into. We fund external bodies to help us achieve our vision and goals for the city, and SPG is the mechanism by which we assess that, and for me that feels like the right fit, even though that I recognise that that's not the answer that these organisations want in this chamber today and may well cause some problems in this and the next financial year, but I feel like there's integrity in that position and we should hold to it.
Okay, we're going to speak to, is anyone going to speak to the one that's on the table? Yeah, okay, thank you. Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr Chair. I'm just going to speak to the stormwater. After sitting on that hearing, it came through quite strongly that we needed a future development strategy, a stormwater strategy. So I strongly support that. I'm sure Councillor Zabellin strongly supports that as well, as does Councillor Johnson. We need a strategy for the city for our stormwater, particularly because we are doing a lot of infill. So we need to, I hope you support us, and it's unanimous around the table to get a strategy because we actually need one. So that's why I'm strongly supporting that recommendation. Thank you.
Before I go to you, Councillor Zabellin, just to the officers, there is a cost to this, isn't there? There's 70,000 per year over 2 years. Am I right in that?
I think it's 103,000 in year one and 45,000 in year two.
Okay.
I mean, I think we would certainly look to use internal officers to do the strategy and policy work in terms of developing the strategy. I think what we're talking about here is, a stormwater strategy is going to require quite a good level of technical information, technical contributions into it in terms of how the network's performing, where it isn't, mitigation options over the long term. So, yeah, as I said, I think we can use internal resources to lead the work, but it's more about that technical input where we'll need some consultancy support.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Zabellin.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Yes, I am going to speak in support of stormwater. Big surprise. I think we had remarkable consistency across all the submissions that waters is a critical spend, and I think we do have a really strong social licence to act and spend in this space, this key infrastructure. And we know that stormwater capacity and our future development plans are a cause for concern, that we do have some gaps of knowledge of our current network, and there have been concerns raised through the submissions about infill, the capacity, growth into greenfield areas. So I just have to conclude that having a strategy for our stormwater is absolutely essential. So please support.
Okay, councillors, the budget's actually set out in 5.23, so it's there to see. Apologies, that probably should have been up there, right up front. So it is 140 over 2 years, 100 in year one, and then 40 something in the next year. Look, just in summary, we've got to do this work. If the city is to develop, we need to understand properly what our stormwater is like. We've got a fair idea, but there, as Councillor Ballin said, there is some gaps. It came up time and time again in the future development strategy, and I think it'd be remiss of us if we didn't put this forward. It's basically a cost of a growing city, being a growing city, and it's good asset management as well, and understanding what we have. So I hope you can please support this. Just on the other two, I think look, they're very worthy, and I think having that debate around the SPG is probably the right place to do that. I'd just say, although that's a great program, you're either locked in or you're locked out, and it's 3 long years while you wait to get back in. So that's the only thing about putting everything into that basket. Anyway, we're voting on this one, future development stormwater strategy for prior to the development of the 2027 future development strategy. So if you could vote, please. And that's passed 16 votes for and none against. Right, we now come to... Oh, okay. All right, we'll do that. Yep. Okay, we're just going to go back and capture these youth ones, the food security and the seismic. Yeah, and we'll do seismic, and then we've captured them, and then we can get into the guts of everything else. So if we could go first to the youth, and this is from Councillor Hancock. This is 2F1, and this is around council agreeing to create a new program for youth wellbeing of 33.3 thousand, excluding inflation funding, of 33.3, which is invested to support youth wellbeing for each of the years 1, 2 and 3 of the LTP, specifically to create a youth development reference group, fund an annual youth wellbeing forum, and provide a pilot quick response youth development fund. Moved by Councillor Hancock, seconded by Councillor Johnson. Councillor Hancock, please speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I've rephrased this, I guess, in terms of where it was previously, which was just a blanket $100,000 to be put into the long-term plan. And the reasons, of course, are pretty obvious to everybody, I think, here in the chamber and also across the community, that over the last 3 to 4 years, we've seen escalating issues with young people, antisocial behaviour, crime and also truancy from our schools. The Youth Wellbeing Forum that we held in April this year threw up a number of, I think, fairly obvious outcomes, and that is we've got a youth sector that is overworked. They are too busy to connect strategically across the entire sector, and these gaps are acknowledged, and in particular there is some challenges around funding. Youth make up at least a quarter of our population, and during the forum the youth certainly exposed the fears and challenges facing many of our rangatahi and tamariki. So what I've done is I've taken council officers' advice in terms of how we might in fact structure and use this overall $100,000, and that is to set up a youth wellbeing and development reference group Of course, we have other reference groups that we use for other sectors in the community. And also run an annual youth wellbeing forum. And thirdly, to pilot a priority youth development fund. So our challenges that we face in our community and right across New Zealand are increased marginalisation of our young people, an overworked youth sector, which is not joined up, and if that is left unchecked, the situation will only get worse. There is, I suppose, an argument which I probably anticipate, and that is some people will say, well, this is central government's problem and they should be funding it to resolve it. Well, that might happen sometime in the future, but it is not happening now. And what I say to that is simply this, is that what we've actually done in the past has not done our community any good whatsoever. We need to be rethinking what it is we do, where council fits inside that, and actually try and make an appreciable difference for our young people. Our youth are our opportunity to maximise the potential of every person in our community. And so I think it is just absolutely a no-brainer really to invest 33.3k per annum for the next 3 years to try and actually turn this ship around. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to support this, and also will just point out to elected members that under LTP Other, which I presume is recommendations that don't have budget attached, that we've also got a recommendation that the Chief Executive provide a youth wellbeing and youth development progress report annually, and that's to check that this funding is producing outcomes. So, and what I would say is that I think in the course of this term, we've identified that we've actually got a gap in our strategic, approach, particularly as regards youth. A number of submissions pointed this out to us, but also some of the activity in the square and in the CBD has meant that we were fortunate that the Mayor managed to find some funding to allow the Youth Wellbeing Forum to go ahead. And that, I think, produced an excellent report that was presented that really indicated some of the ongoing issues in the youth sector. So I think that this is a relatively small investment for an area that's key importance not only to youth, but also to the wellbeing of everyone else in the city. I think council has a role here as facilitator. This isn't the amount of money that we would put in if we were doing everything ourselves, but this is a means of bringing the sector together, identifying gaps and maybe identifying solutions. So I do hope that you'll support it. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was wondering if I might ask a question of the mover, if that would be all right. Just to get an understanding, Councillor, as to what a pilot quick response youth development fund is and would do, and are you envisaging that would be 10,000 of it a year or 20,000 or 25? How much do you envisage that being, and what would it do?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Wood. And to say it's a fair question. I think ultimately there is a pot of $33,300 per annum, and that there is really for our community development team really to define exactly how that is spent, because obviously a youth forum may cost X dollars this year, but it might be slightly different next year. So it's for them to decide exactly how it is they actually utilise that funding. And of course, the pilot fund really is, I guess, an opportunity for us to actually fund partly, certainly, some initiatives to support youth wellbeing and development.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Look, councillors, I think Councillor Hancock has sort of phrased this right now. I wasn't supportive of the 100,000. We will run the whole thing program before, but I do understand that you were trying to refine it to get it on the table. So I think it's well pitched now. and I can support it. It's because we're one of the players now. We're not the only player, and I think that's critical here. Look, 25%. Some of the stats that Councillor Hancock spoke about, I think, points to why we should be doing this. 25% of the city demographic is young, is youth. We're the second youngest city per capita in the country, so we've got to support them. They, it's interesting. We talk up youth all the time, but when it comes down to the nitty gritty, there's not a lot that we do for them. So look, we've got a youth team. Yes, we have some FTEs in that, but they do a lot of other things in community development and in libraries. But we do need a plan, and I think it's got to be collaborative and with other partners, including government agencies. So we're not filling the role of government here, but we certainly, from a local government perspective, are in the tent with them. The NGOs, the youth lines, all those other players that are they need to be involved as well. We've had many faith and church groups come to us about helping, and we should involve them as well. Iwi, of course, and other youth groups themselves. There's many programs too, and really around alternative education, which is what I'm quite excited about, where this may go. And that's connecting up the dots with the Highbury Whānau Centre, with Youthline. There's an opportunity through UCOL and Sir Graham Lowe's Seagulls program around numeracy and literacy. Councillor Hancock and myself met with them, and it's actually, we're going to fail people if we don't try and do something. So I think this is worthy. It's 33,000. I like the idea of having some sort of report back that actually captures the outcomes. It's measurable. And look, we're just failing our young people if we don't. We know there's a problem, so we've got to try and intervene somewhere. This is doing it in partnership. This is not trying to do everything ourselves. So I think it's manageable. And I ask you to support it. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do struggle with requests like this at this stage of our meeting, when really I think our focus should be, based on the submissions that we've had, looking to decrease some of our operational spend rather than increase it. However, it is an important area. I do support some aspects of this recommendation. I think we're already a player in this space. I think we already do invest significantly in youth. When the report came to the committee, included in that report, I think it was about $700,000 worth of strategic priority grants that already goes to youth focused programs or groups in the community that are focused towards youth. We already have a youth council. We already have a well-funded youth space. I think the concern I have when there's ideas like this that come to council, we address it by simply adding money on, where I think we've got significant funding within our current existing budgets, that we can say, highlight this as a priority and reprioritise the way that we distribute our current existing resources to address this. So whilst I support many aspects of the ideas in this, I support having an annual youth wellbeing forum, but I'm not prepared to say yes to this recommendation in terms of the additional resource, given the existing resource we already have in the organisation.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to actually speak in favour of this, and it will be no surprise that I actually support this. I support this for a number of reasons, and I'll start off by saying that the youth are our future, and it's important that we invest in them. Whilst I do acknowledge that accountability for young people is a shared responsibility across all government level, we do have an opportunity, or we do have actually a role to play in this space. I think coming from this youth forum, and also the reports that we've read or that was given to us here by officers, the report identified that we have gaps in services available to young people or to support young people in Palmerston North. And I believe that the proposed budget, or what Councillor Hancock is actually putting in front of us, will actually go a long way in strengthening the Council's internal youth services provision, and also strengthen the youth support sector, strengthen support for the youth sector. Young people told us in that report that some of the services that they wanted but could not find included safe places for various age groups, programs or initiatives for those not in education, employment or training, and the need for more role models and mentors, especially outside of school. While the council, Councillor Nello just pointed this out, that we have a number of initiatives that the council is already doing. While I acknowledge that the council is already contributing directly or indirectly to well-being outcomes for young people, including youth development initiatives such as the Youth Council, scholarship and grants, city ambassadors, and outdoors amenities such as parks, fields, skate parks, or bike trails, or basketball court. The key point is this, that it is difficult to extract specific demographic investment across all council services. So we do not exactly know that those initiatives, which groups are actually benefiting from those groups. And Palmerston North has about 20,000 youth, and that's aging from between the age of 10 to 24. This equates to about 22.1% of the city's population. 22.1% of the city's population. That's a huge percentage to ignore or not to invest in. And I believe that the proposed funding will actually go a long way in addressing some of the root causes that are driving youth crime and inactivity in our cities. It will also go a long way in maximizing opportunities for positive engagement and contribution in our community. It will support groups of young people who are experiencing higher rates of marginalization and inequity, especially our Pacifica youth, our Maori youth, and more importantly, our migrants and refugees, or those are young women as well, and also our youth in our rainbow communities. I believe that it is our role to actually invest in our young people. We cannot just complain about our young people being idle or inactive in our CBD, causing trouble to businesses at the square, and not be willing to invest in them. If we want better outcomes for young people, we need to invest in them. So I'll leave it at there, and I'll support this, and I commend Councillor Hancock for actually bringing this to the table. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I probably don't quite agree with everything Councillor Mickle had just said, because I don't think there's any suggestion that we are failing to invest or ignoring our young people at the moment. I think Council does a lot of work in that space, and we do it very well. But that's not to say that there isn't more that we should be doing. And I think that has been a common conversation, probably since the last election campaign, actually, about the needs of young people in our community. And this particularly came home to me in reinforcing the need here in the submissions that actually came to the long-term plan around the role that Creative Sounds has played, ironically, since we just didn't take them forward in the last discussion, but in the role that they've played in supporting the young people across our various diverse communities in the city. There's definitely a need in this space, and it's not Council's job to answer every need, but we do have a role in facilitating bringing community groups together. And I think this allocation of funding is a proportionate response that enables us to lean into our undoubted strengths in that area and work with the community groups that we already have good relationships with, and to extend that reach into other parts of the community in order to get the better outcomes that our young people undoubtedly deserve.
Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship, o te rā tēnā tātou. Very much like Councillor Bowen, actually pretty much all of it, Fire. I'm supporting this because having worked with young people for quite a long time, 44 years, I see the need And I want to reiterate too that I know what we do with our young people, the services we offer are fantastic, and the people that are there that we have from our council staff and those that might be contracted in do a great job, but they're under the pump. And there's a lot of pressures. There are multifaceted pressures that our young people face. And even though we're looking at that demographic from those who are 10 years to 24 years, I would say that we really should go from 0 to 24 because they're a different generation of young people as well, and their needs are quite complex and they're very different. And we've heard from young people, I commend those who came and gave submissions, but that was just a very small group of those who came of our youth demographic that came along to present. And I agree with Councillor Johnson when she had said, you know, that the well-being not only of our young people but of our entire community will be improved, enhanced, if we are putting a greater lens over this for our young people. So thank you, Councillor Hancock, for bringing this forward, and to Councillor Johnson. I do think it's important to put, I think it's a little bit. What we do offer is good, but that's sort of baseline stuff. This is actually adding a little bit more to enhance what we already have. Kia ora. Thank you, Your Worship.
And right, a reply back to you, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, colleagues, for your support and supportive comments. Yeah, I guess probably just in closing, really, you know, the Youth Council acknowledged, you know, we do invest in that. And of course, we had a couple of schools that actually came in to make oral submissions to the long-term plan. All of those groups actually talked about, you know, the unsafeness of our CBD, and also talked about the need for council to support youth wellbeing. So this is not, you know, something which has been kind of sort of dreamt up on the fly. And I guess probably the overriding sort of theme that underpins this is that, you know, our young people are more vulnerable today than I think they ever have been. Certainly certain sections of our community, and it would just be totally negligent for us to ignore the signs of what is actually going on in our community and ignore this as, or just say that there is actually no need for us to invest in this area. You know, what cries out here is for the sector to actually be united and actually utilise their skills and their resources in a way which is a collective impact in terms of trying to actually change the outcomes for many young people in our city. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, our young people are our resource, and they are the people who will be here tomorrow when many of us are no longer here. So it's really important that we actually take every young person with us and don't ignore the need that exists presently. So those are my closing comments, Mr Mayor, and thank you very much for your support, and also acknowledge our council officers for their support of this as well. Thank you.
Right, we will vote, please, on the youth wellbeing recommendation. And that is passed 14 votes for and 2 against. All right, we'll now move through to the next recommendation, and this is around food security, and this is 2F2, that Council increase the funding provided to the Environment Network Manawatu through the Strategic Priority Grants Fund for the Environment Initiatives Fund by $30,000 to support food security projects and inform the development of a citywide food security and resilience policy. And this is from Councillor Zabellin, seconded by Councillor Johnson. Councillor Zabellin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So have been hesitant to put up any cost increases, and so I have suggested some reductions later on, but this particular recommendation is in response to submissions that have been in support of a food security and resilience policy for the city. And we heard last week in the Sustainability Committee that some indication of resourcing is required to develop that policy any further, but that the nature of that resourcing and the size of it has been undetermined. But some suggestions were given. So this recommendation is at the lesser end of the scale of suggested resourcing. It's seeking to give some immediate resourcing through an existing grant funding mechanism, the Environmental Initiatives Fund, and it has a dual effect of quite quickly enabling some community-led food security and resilience initiatives, but also giving direction to that policy to be more fully scoped and developed. And it elevates the food security projects from quite a broad list of criteria in the Environmental Initiatives Fund, but it doesn't commit us to additional staff or resourcing where those decisions haven't yet been made. We have heard a lot in submissions about people struggling to feed their families, and there's a balance to be struck here where there's actually only so much we can do to tackle the monstrous debt that is required of us to fund growth and waters, although we're giving it a good go. But we can implement a very small fund for grassroots projects to be more effective and impactful in the work that they're already doing to alleviate the stress and hardship for people who are facing those struggles at this time. So that's all I want to say on that, but I would urge you to support it to get us started on this food security policy. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Apologies, Mr. Mayor, the recommendation has just changed, so I'm just reading it. May I ask a question through officers? It had said funding it through the SPG fund, but now it's saying through the sector lead agreement. Is that something we can make a political decision on, or is that reviewed in its entirety with the other sector lead organisations? Is this something we can do politically?
Sorry, do you just want to repeat your question? I missed it because there was people talking around, and I'm not. Did you hear it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Through the chair, so they're not funded through the sector lead. Through the strategic priority grant, they're funded through the sector lead partnership agreement. So what's actually on the screen now is actually correct. Apologies for the error provided initially.
Thank you. Right, I'll just speak briefly, Mr. Mayor. I'll just echo the comments of councillors in the previous discussion we just had about the Housing Advice Centre about Creative Sounds, which had almost the same wording, increase for the sector lead grant to provide X services. This is effectively the same thing, it's just for a different issue. So the last one we said, right, we're not going to give Creative Sounds an increase to their sector lead partnership to provide a particular program, a program of benefit, a program of value, a program that I believe would be very good to continue, but we would rather they go through the standard funding mechanisms of council and just take the politics out of it. So I'm just going to echo that argument and say I believe it applies here as well. I don't deny it's a worthy cause, I don't deny it's a good program, but if we've just told two other sector lead organisations we're not going to make political decisions in the chamber to fund particular programs and we'd rather you do it that way, I don't think we should then immediately in the next item go and do it for someone else. And I appreciate the merits of this argument. I appreciate the merits of what they're proposing and what the proposers are saying. And I think it's good to encourage community resilience and community sustainability. But at the end of the day, I think it would be a slap in the face to Creative Sounds and to the Housing Advice Centre to say, oh, we'll do it for some, but we won't do it for you, if that's our reason. So I won't support it.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. The idea of this resolution is to provide an indication to staff of the level of resourcing that we think will be appropriate while they develop the car resilience policy. So if councillors recall, in the Sustainability Committee, there was a discussion around what level of resourcing would be appropriate for the policy, and there was a bit of discussion about, well, it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, because if we don't know what the policy is, how can we resource it? But then on the other hand, if staff don't know how much we're prepared to resource it, how can they develop the policy? So the aim of this resolution was to provide an indication from council that we felt that the $30,000 in grant funding for car resilience projects was the best way to resource this policy. Now, this is a council-led initiative. That's the difference between this and other requests for funding. So where other groups have come to us to say they they would like more funding, I think that they should apply for that through the contestable fund. This is a council-led policy that is being developed, that we need to indicate what level of resourcing we would be prepared to put to it. That's the difference. So in terms of identifying the 30,000, it assists staff in their ability to develop the policy. It needn't necessarily, although I'm hoping it will, result in an increase to the Strategic Priority Grants Fund. Now, there's been a bit of discussion about the name of the fund. What councillors may remember is that we had one big pot for strategic priority grants, and initially sector leads were funded out of that pot. And then was decided to divide up the pot, so there would be one amount of funding for sector leads and the rest of it would be strategic priority grants. But ultimately the size of the pot didn't change, it was just divided up into two different parts. So I don't see this as being equivalent to requests from funding by community groups. Environment Network Manawatu haven't come to us to request 30,000. We ourselves have determined that we think that this would be a suitable level of funding to be able to resource this policy. And might I say, it's not a generous level because we could have gone for 1 FTE or half FTE on top. So this is the minimum level of additional resourcing that I think we might put forward. So I do hope that you'll support it, councillors. There's no point in having policy if you haven't put anything into the pot to help resource that policy. Otherwise, it's just not going to be effective, as officers told us in the Sustainability Committee. And if you weren't at that meeting, I suggest you look at the recording. So I strongly suggest that we agree with this because the alternative is that we then have to do this work ourselves. And as we all know, a dollar spent in the community is a more valuable dollar because it enables organisations like E&M to use volunteers. So the amount of, if you like, bang for your buck that you're going to get by putting money out into the community is much greater. So I think that this is a sensible and proportionate response to developing the policy, and I do hope that you'll support it.
Thank you, Councillor. You've probably raised a couple of questions, and I just might... This originally did come from E&M originally around the food security and resilience plan that they had originally.
Thank you. They have indicated support for us developing a policy, but they've made no specific requests as to resourcing that or how that would look.
Yeah. So they came and gave us a presentation. Yeah. What do we can I ask officers? We currently fund the. I know it's a different question, but it's the same sector. Environment Network Manawatu, we do about 200,000 a year in funding. It was in their annual report. I had a look at. Yeah. Just the overall level of funding we give this organisation.
Kia ora koutou, ko Amy Viles tōku ingoa. Through the Chair, Environment Network Manawatu are a sector lead, and through that funding in the last financial year, it's 172,000 and some change.
Yeah, and there's obviously other programs that get it up a bit higher.
Yeah, so within that full amount, we have 4 agreed activities that we fund. One is for E&M as their operational fund. Yeah. One is for the Manawatu River Source to Sea. One is for the Manawatu Food Action Network, and one is for the Environmental Initiatives Fund. And so within that full amount, E&M can decide as part of the agreed activities, as part of their contract with us, what they spend that money on.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Mr Mayor, I have some questions too, if that's okay. I had a question at the beginning of the meeting about the size of the strategic priority grant, and I don't know if officers have got the answer to that, but when we asked, there's a $4 million increase to community support in the budget, and an answer to that was provided of the breakdown of that increase, and included, they said, what 360,000 of that was for strategic priority grants. which if that's correct, that's a 29% increase, and that just sounded more than what I would have expected from CPI. If we could understand,
Sorry, what's the question? Yeah.
The question is the $360,000 extra that officers indicated was for SPGs, is that correct? And
Okay.
is that a 29% increase to SPGs?
Okay. Let's just get the answers to that.
Through the chair, that's just what I've been working on since that question this morning, and the team upstairs and throughout the chamber have also been helping with that. No, that's not correct. That piece of advice was an incorrect bit of information. What has eventuated, as we've discovered this, is we have duplicated the sector lead programs with the money in the strategic priorities grant. So we have overinflated the increase there. With the homelessness program that has gone into there, as there's let me start that sentence again. There is a $120,000 increase from the current year for support to community groups through the grants paid function. That is inclusive of the homelessness program being added and combination of grants, as well as inflationary increases on the strategic priority grants of $56,000, as well as inflation on the other grants of around $63,000. I hope that was clear. Yeah, correct. The increase on SPG is 56,000.
Okay. All right, Councillor, do you have any comments?
Okay, I just thought it was helpful for us to understand that in light of additional requests. I didn't quite catch all of that, but I can come back to that later.
Okay, Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I also ask a question, it might be through you to the officers, that in the Social Wellbeing Forum in 2019 report, enabling food sovereignty was highlighted as one of the goals. Is this part of what this would be providing? No, and was there any work that was done out of that enabling food sovereignty goal, which I thought we already had moved in the direction of having a summary of where we're at least with the 4412 community?
Have we got somebody that can answer that? Yeah, acknowledging it was quite a while ago. And if you can't answer it, that's fine.
I can't remember the specifics of the social wellbeing forum outcomes regarding high security, so we'd need to go back and have another look at that, other than to say that in the Ora Connect space with the Manawatu Food Action Network, we've had the Kai Resilience Strategy that's happened since then, and a considerable amount of work has been occurring across the city, but particularly in the 4412 when it comes to Kai Resilience building. But I can come back with more information around the social wellbeing forum.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you, Sophie. Or you could actually, it'd be interesting. But I'll speak to this. I don't think this is new. I think there's been a lot of work done on reports as far as the food security and the resilience policy and the 4412 and the Ora Connect work. It's not like we have to start again. And I'd love to have an update report of actually compiling what we've already done rather than spending more money as if we're starting again. So that's one point. The second one is around the sector lead partnership. I don't quite understand it. I thought it was coming out of the strategic grants, but it's not. And I'm not quite sure how this is proposing. The sector lead, I think that's up for review on how some of the groups got nominated in the first point. And so for that basis, I just know there's been work done on some of these reports, and I'd rather than reinventing it and paying for it again, I'd rather assess the information that's already known, and I'll pose this. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to be very brief. I'm going to support this, and just to enlighten Councillor Dennison, the sector leads were split off from the SPG, so they're two separate things. I actually received some information this morning in terms of Methodist Social Services in terms of their social supermarket and the number of clients that they're actually supporting at the moment. 1,400. 1,400 through one social service around food security. So if that doesn't tell you something, then you're blind. So please support this. It's something that is much needed in our community. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I think this area is hugely important, and I do want to see it funded. However, what is currently in our budgets is massive. I've got a list here of over $3 million worth of grants that we make to our community that is currently included in our draft long-term plan for the first year. 1.597 of that is for the strategic priority grants, including the sector leads. My view is that we need to reprioritise the existing funding that we already give our community rather than keeping on adding and adding and adding. I think this, if I had to say what were the most important things in all of those things, food security would be right up there. Particularly, a lot of our submissions, actually, we heard the impact of our rates increase on people saying that they'll have to think about what they can put on their table for their children. You know, so from that perspective, food is one of the fundamental basics. And if there's things that we can do to assist that, I support it. But what I don't support is just adding extra money that then puts more of a burden on ratepayers when we've already got $3 million currently that we're giving away in grants to our community in our budget.
Councillor Johnson, you've already spoken to this? Okay, yes you can, sorry.
Thank you. I just wanted to address some of, I think, confusion that has arisen that councillors have expressed. Councillors who aren't on the Sustainability Committee and so who didn't hear the report back from officers last week. So I just want to address that. We requested officers to develop a food resilience strategy for the city, and that came from community asking us to develop it, and that's been in development for some time. Now, at Sustainability Committee last week, staff presented us with a working draft of the policy and said that they wanted an indication from us as to how much we were prepared to resource it. And there was some discussion in committee as to whether or not they should be developing the policy and then we would work out how much to resource it, or whether or not they needed an indication from us of the level of resourcing before they developed the policy. So that discussion occurred at committee, and the upshot of it is that we were advised that if we could provide some indication of the level of resourcing we were comfortable with, that would help in development of the policy. So the aim of this resolution is to provide that guidance to staff. I understand that if you weren't at the Sustainability Committee, you're wondering where this is coming from. There are other food security projects occurring in the city, but this is about us determining how much resource we want to put to our policy. Now, Councillor Zabellin has suggested that we resource the policy by providing $30,000 worth of grants to a community organisation to be able to resource the policy in that way. The other options that were put before us were either a full-time FTE council resource or a part-time FTE council resource. So this, on a scale of things, this is the smallest possible resourcing of that policy that we could put forward. And the significance of giving that grant funding to a community organisation, as I said before, is that the money is multiplied up in its effect because there'll be volunteers performing the work primarily, and therefore we'll get more for our 30,000 than if we ourselves as council spent 30,000. So that's what it's about. I understand if you weren't at committee and you didn't catch up with those minutes, that this, you don't quite see where this is coming from. So I hope that that explains it. I would just finally like to address the comment that was made about we're giving away money. We're not giving away money. What we're doing is providing grants to organisations to achieve our strategic aims as a council. So I really can't accept the phrase giving away money. We as a council have determined what our goals are for the city, and we have determined that the best way of us achieving those goals is to resource community organisations who in the main use volunteers to be able to work towards those goals, because they are able to make a dollar go much further. So just want to make that clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I didn't want to interrupt Councillor Johnson as you made a call to allow the councillor to speak a second time, but I just, in the interest of the meeting going for the next 2 days, if we set a precedent, councillors can speak multiple times. I'm just wondering, I'm reading 2.1, 2.3 regarding option C, and nowhere in this does it say a councillor can speak multiple times to the same amendment. It says they can second amendments, even if they've already spoken. I was just wondering if you would make a call on whether or not that's a precedent we're setting for the rest of this meeting.
Well, look, we'll do that in a break. I got advice to say you could, so it's a good point, but we'll, I'm not going to debate it on the fly. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, colleagues. Just wanted to briefly speak to this to just underscore the fact that this is by far and away the best value dollars that we can actually approach on this. And I know there's some discomfort around the table and some quarters around seeing it go to sector leads and that kind of stuff. But again, all of the other options in front of us would be substantially more expensive and substantially less efficient than this, okay? But if we put this money into our own organization, we attract corporate overhead and everything else. So we are far better to put a modest investment into the community to actually drive this forward. The reality is that E&M is currently at and arguably above capacity in many areas. So, you know, turning this into kind of a policy boomerang that comes back around on them as an unfunded mandate is incredibly unfair and unwise, I would say, and not a precedent that we would want to be setting as a council. We're quite often frustrated by and quite often happy to speak about unfunded mandates coming out of Wellington and landing us with extra work. We should not be setting a precedent as a council of putting unfunded mandates against our community groups. So we would be wise to invest a small amount to bridge this policy into an active stance. So the other option, obviously, is that we end up with a policy that is just some words on a paper that has no resource, no influence, no impetus behind it. And clearly, as we've heard from others, the scale of food insecurity in this community is of great concern and needs responded to on multiple fronts. So this is a modest approach that actually takes us there and would encourage colleagues to support on that basis, rather than getting hung up on whether or not it sits through a partner sector lead partnership agreement or some other mechanism. This is the best bang for the buck, and let's get on with it.
Just before I go to you, Councillor, for right of reply, this is a one-off I'm taking? It's not 30,000 each year continually continued? It is per annum. Okay, doesn't say that. So you might want to put that up. Okay, well, that's certainly made my mind up. Look, to me, this is quite political too. Environment Network Manawatu did come to us. I can recall Dave, I think Muller, that's his name, he came and did a presentation to us. I remember being at the meeting. And then I think actually the former mayor was doing some work in the security and resilience space as well. Look, it's very worthwhile, and I'm not saying it isn't, but that we do need to cut the cloth at some stage. The organisation is funded very well from us, not so well from some of our other partners in the environmental space. But I struggle when we've got so many issues around the cost of living, and yet we're going to have a 30K per year, year on. I'd prefer to see, and I think Councillor Dennison's right, there has been so many other papers that have come to us, other reports that have come to us, that surely something could be pulled together from a lot of those. And I appreciate that there's policy people here that perhaps are quite new and they probably haven't seen some of the social wellbeing, some of the other food security reports that have come to us numerous times that would help inform this. So, yeah, I just have some real issues with, it's just another, it is political, it is actually just more money. I'm not saying it's not a good cause, but when do we stop? Councillor Zabellin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Johnson for giving the context as to what occurred and what the contents of the report to the Sustainability Committee entailed. For those who haven't read those papers, there was a research report attached to that report, which was extensive. It is current up to the week almost of it being published, and it has extensive engagement with the numerous organisations that are working in this space in the city and wider, including CEDA, who developed their food strategy for the region, and it was extremely wide-ranging and extremely well sourced in terms of primary documentation, including the Wellbeing Forum and many, or if not all, of the documents that you're referring to. So if you're looking for something to be pulled together from existing reports from the past, this is it. That was what that report was doing. It's a very good read. Highly suggest that you have a look into it. Also, just to, I guess, clarify, it's been very difficult to pin down where the Environmental Initiatives Fund sits from the budgets that we've been provided with, and no visibility on how much that fund is. So I take the point that E&M gets a significant amount through the sector lead partnership, but only a small and undetermined number at this point actually is there for the administration of those particular funds. But particularly, we cannot progress a food security policy that does anything without indicating some resourcing, and that is the primary motivator of this particular recommendation. The officer's suggestion of $30,000 as a small fund was taken up as the least amount of resourcing. I think E&M would probably be quite disappointed with that, but they haven't come and asked us specifically for what resourcing needs to go into it. They've just asked us to develop a policy. It's the staff and the officers who've said we need some resourcing indications to know how we're going to pitch it. We could administer $30,000 ourselves, but there is an existing mechanism that lists food security as a criteria. So it's the rationale there is just to be efficient and make use of the things that we've already got before we start new funds. It is ultimately a way to signal the level of resourcing to get a policy underway, and without signalling a level of resourcing, there'll be no policy to get underway that can do really anything. It'll be a toothless document. Fundamentally, the research report captures all the sectors working in this area and the actual tangible help and difference that they're making in people's lives in this cost of living crisis to help them get food on their table. This is a small fund for a huge amount of good, helping people to learn how to feed themselves. Please support it. It won't go any further without your support.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, we've got the food security recommendation up there. We'll vote on that, please. And that is passed, 8 votes for and 7 against. All right, we'll move to the final one there around Seismic. Okay, this is around 2D2, and this is program 902 property. Seismic strengthening of council's properties is amended to the following, and it's year 1 to 10, year 1 being 0, year 2 being 2 million, Regent Theatre design general work for the Central Library in Te Manawa. Year 3 and year 4 are both 6.5 each around the Regent. Year 5 is 1 million around the Central Library design. Year 6 is 29 million for the Central Library. Year 7 is 30 million for the Central Library. And years 8, 9 and 10 are 1 million, 29 million and 30 million respectively for Te Manawa. That's from Councillor Isabellan and seconded by Councillor Naylor. I'll ask you to speak to that, Councillor Isabellan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Also, just wanted to check with the seconder, we had indicated that we intended for, especially for years 3 and 4, to reflect the officers' figures. I think it'd been rounded to 6.5, but there was a more specific figure for that one. But while we're working on that, I just want to talk briefly to it that generally for this program, I think there is a high level of uncertainty and quite an optimistic view regarding co-funding. It's potentially unrealistic, but the intention of this recommendation is to keep the program as has been suggested by officers, but to defer by 1 year to complete the planning and preparatory work in year 2, and then to get on with the Regent, because it's pretty straightforward. We know what we're doing there. Let's get on and do it. But acknowledging that there is a lot more work to be done in relation to the Central Library and Te Manawa, and trying to stagger that cost and spread it throughout future LTPs, so that there are some LTPs that aren't lumped with a really big sum all at once. Just trying to stretch it out, stagger it, so we even the cost of it. I think that's all I've got to say about that. Thank you.
Councillor Barn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was a question for officers, if I could. So with the proposal to push everything back, leaving year 1 with nothing in it, how does that impact on the deliverability of programme 1949?
What is that program?
1949 is the Civic and Cultural Precinct planning budgets.
David, do you want to speak to that?
What I would say is those that program number which you just referenced
1949
is the operational budget to effectively work out how we're going to set up and structure a partnership model. So it's the planning for how we're going to deliver these projects. So my advice was that funding needs to stay regardless, because we need to start having those conversations and setting up structures.
So the 1949 budget needs to stay regardless, but it doesn't matter if we push all of this back 1 year for that work?
No.
No. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just wondering if I could ask a question of the mover.
Yes. Councillor Isabellan.
Apologies, Councillor. Just wondering if I could ask a question. I note that in the consultation document, the Central Library was budgeted at 65 million and Te Manawa was budgeted at 67 million. I notice in these figures you've decreased those to $61 million for each project. I was wondering if that was intentional or not, and if that was on purpose or not.
Yes, we took that from the thinking paper that had been provided to councillors. That's where our figures have come from, but they're not quite aligned with what is in the agenda for today. So that's what we're just looking at, those figures, not quite aligning.
Okay, so is your intention that they would be aligned though?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. If the mover is in agreement, I think the intent of this had been to follow the officer's recommendations that are outlined in 5.14 on page 81. And these numbers, as Councillor Isabellan has just pointed out, were a bit rounded down and were based on the Chief Executive's thinking paper. What is in the paper, I was thinking that we should have just adopted the numbers that were in the paper. So if that's able to be amended. So what this recommendation is responding to is many of the submissions that indicated that our capital program was just too big and unaffordable, and the acknowledgement that much of our rates increases, particularly in the early years, is to do with the increase in debt. With the government's recent decision to push out the requirements for earthquake-prone buildings 4 years, that does give us a little bit more room to move, and we also at this stage are unaware whether there'll be further changes in that space. The program currently, as it stands in the draft LTP, was about 155 million. What's proposed here is basically what is in our papers, but deferred 1 year. So that really focuses on the Regent for years 2, 3, 4, and then the middle years and the outer years is focused on the Central Library in Te Manawa. Acknowledging that we still have a lot of work to do to determine what form those buildings should take. I think we probably need a little bit of time to consider that as well. So this does buy us a little bit of time. It saves it improves our debt profile in terms of, if those of you who've looked at the financial strategy on page 12, years 2 and 3 are way and beyond the debt requirement of any other year in the long-term plan. It's just definitely not spread out at all. It's about 95 million debt each year in those years, whereas other years are 40 or even 0. So my view is that in looking at our capital programs in general, we just need to push them out a little bit and spread them further across and give a bit more consideration to how much we're trying to spend within 10 years. So this would decrease, I haven't worked out the sums with the different numbers that are in this paper, but it would have taken that 155 million down by about 19 million, I think. And what it does is pushes the CAB work out to year 11.
Yeah, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Could I just have a question to officers, please? So in our papers on page 81, we've got the proposal from officers, and on the handout, we've got the proposal from Councillor Isabella and Councillor Naylor. So can I just have an officer comment on any implications or issues that there might be with adopting the recommendation from Councillor Isabella as opposed to the recommendation from officers that we've got on page 81?
Bryce Hosking, Group Manager, Property and Resource Recovery. There's a couple of implications. I guess it's worthwhile acknowledging that the next 10-year period, so years 11 to 20, for instance, will have more in it. So the end date at the moment won't move, but you'll be looking to do a lot more in that time period. We would also need to readjust the renewals and the maintenance budgets for Central Library in Te Manawa, because we'd timed them to basically stop. So then we were going to do a rebuild and then kick in again once we've built them. We'll have to move that around. So that'll just be something we can probably do as part of the final sign-off period.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Barrett. Councillor Bowen.
Sorry, I magically came on there. I just wanted to check that meant Keisha Birch would be in year 11 rather than year 10.
Next cab off the rank, I think, was CAB. So Keisha Birch was next after that. So it would probably be year 13-ish.
And do we see any implications for moving that out of this long-term plan?
Probably not at this stage. It was sitting at the back end of the current 10-year period anyway. And we'll be looking to continue maintenance and renewals leading up to that. And the closer we get to those kind of projects, then we will start to make those kind of tactical decisions around what we renew and what we don't, for instance.
Okay, thank you, Bryce.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question through you to officers. Can I understand how these budgets have been assessed, knowing that, you know, the work's quite a big, massive task? Can I understand the sort of percentage you're using for contingency and versus kind of assessed actual costs?
For many of these, there isn't an assessed actual cost. So generally working to about a 30% contingency because we're dealing with structures and simply don't know what that triggers. This kind of work also requires a pretty comprehensive building consent, so it tends to also trigger things like fire compliance and the likes that currently a building is compliant, but once you apply for a new consent, you then have to do a whole bunch of that work. So there's been a number of things trying to be built into this, but to be clear, some of these figures have been based on very rough estimates that they're not, but we don't have the designs done for these yet, and until we actually get the designs done, we won't be in a position to be able to refine costs or give you any kind of actuals.
Just in the fact of knowing that we've have to do the earthquake strengthening work for a number of years now, when will it be that, even in this timeline, that we'll do the designs for the region, let alone the library, on this staggered approach to actually get a more actual figure to base the next long-term plan off, for example? When do we do the design? Are we doing it just in time, it seems like? Or can I just understand the thinking or what the approach is going to be?
The current program is structured around doing design, build, design, build, design, build. So for every, essentially the year before we would be looking to build something, we're doing the design for that specific building. An implication of council decreasing the seismic budget in the current year to only be the crematorium was a whole bunch of those pre-designs for things like the Regent then didn't get done, and therefore has been deferred into the LTP. So that we were originally planning on trying to front load 2 or 3 of those designs ahead of time, but unfortunately that was an implication of that decision.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So Bryce, just also, we know the legislation signalled to change too. The ministers made comment about that. And so in some ways actually keeping your powder dry, because you just don't know what that may look like, is probably quite wise too.
Yes, there are some positives in this recommendation. We know definitively now we have an extra 4 years. There is some discussion about increasing that timeline further. The legislation could change in that time. For some of the 2 biggest ones in terms of Te Manawa and the library, this resolution does give us more lead-in time to be trying to secure a financial partner for each of those. So there are some positives as well.
All right. Look, I'll make some comments. I'm quite happy that it's not a huge amendment or deferral by 1 year. I'm quite pleased that we're getting one of our buildings out of the way. I know it's the easiest one to do, but there is some other dynamics around a development partner in the other 2 bigger buildings. If I could just say, if you look at some of the other cities and what they've done, even the likes of, I take Victoria University and Wellington City Council Library, where they've combined forces there, and the university has taken 2 floors of the library, and they've made that work for them. There's a strong possibility we could do that here. So I think we need to give ourselves as much time and as many options, because they're quite big, chunky buildings, and cost-wise, and they're quite well utilised and very well loved too. So there will need to be some time there. I'm also aware that the legislation possibly will change, not just the time frame, because that's just really kicking the same can down the road. It just gives you more time, but it's actually, I mean, the thing, people won't get killed by an earthquake, they'll be killed by debt and bureaucracy with these buildings rather than an unfortunate earthquake coming. So we just have to be somewhat pragmatic too in that space. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Sorry to jump back in, but as the recommendations change, I think it's important we're clear what we're voting on. So Councillor Bell, it now refers to the table 5.14. There's two tables in 5.14. So I just wonder if you'd like to clarify if you're referring to the consultation table or proposed table. I presume you mean the proposed table.
It is the proposed table. We might just put that in there.
Thank you. Sorry to be pedantic.
Thank you. All right. Do you need... You do need right of reply. Okay.
Just real quick to clarify that point, that our intention was to reflect the officer's advice for the proposed table, but to defer it out a year, just to allow us more time to seek that co-funding, make progress with what we're planning to do with the library in Te Manua, noting that the budget for the civic and cultural master plan remains intact, and as the Mayor says, the ground may well shift on this. It's a changing landscape, so let's buy us some time. Thank you.
Well done. Okay, we'll vote. Okay, that's passed 14 votes and 1 against. Right, we'll have a break. It's a good timely spot, and we'll be back in the chamber at 25 past. Thank you. You're a dick. Kia ora tātou, welcome back everybody. We're now on to recommendation 2G. And this is around taking proposed changes and just finding amendments as a result of submissions or determined by this meeting of council. So we're going to start with the nature calls, and then we'll get into capital expenditure, removing, decreasing or deferring. We'll then go to operational expenditure around remove, decrease, defer, and then we'll get into capital expenditure and operational around additions, and then we'll do a catch-all at the end with others. Right, we'll start with nature calls, and this is G0, and yep. So this is that the nature calls budget should be no more than 480 million, excluding inflation, across the 2024-34 long-term plan, and that council instruct the Chief Executive to revisit the best practical options, shortlisted options, and determine if any new industry developments or alternative options could be considered as the best practical option. So councillors, what I'm doing here, we've had a lot of submissions around the affordability and the cost escalations of this project. So if we go back to when we actually made the practical option, the project was 387 plus the land purchase, and it came to a figure of 481, I think. And since that time, including inflation and cost escalations, it's ballooned out to 640 something, 47 million. This is putting a line in the sand, signalling to our community that there does need to be a halt on the cost. It also just gives us a pause and double checks the BPO, the process again. I've taken some advice on this, so this isn't just being dreamt up on the fly. We've had a little bit of officer advice, the CE, legal, and also we will need to be talking to our partners and other stakeholders in this as well, if this did get up. Colleagues, I think we've got to do something, and interesting, when meeting the Minister of Local Government, his first comments to me were about this project and why had the cost ballooned to what it was. And it was, to be honest, it was pretty hard to, other than to saying we were trying to get something that's consentable over the line, it was pretty hard to actually answer some of those questions. So I'll leave it at that and allow others to speak, and we'll go from there. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of questions. Perhaps the first one to you, just to clarify around the second part of that. Would you be seeing that we would be disengaging from Horizons in terms of the current consent that's been lodged, or do you see this as happening concurrent with that activity?
Advice is that we just pause. We would obviously, if this was successful, we need to obviously contact them. We pause, we ask for an extension, and the CE would come back to us with an options report.
Thanks. Could I get some advice around timing and cost of that exercise?
Through Chair, we'd be wanting to move through that obviously as swiftly as possible as well. We do have the latest, we're still looking to lodge the last lot of answers to questions to Horizons anyway and complete that part of the process. It's likely that out of the tail end of that there'll be a whole bunch more questions that will be asked again beyond that. But I would be suggesting that probably inside the first quarter of the next financial year we should be going back and have provided council a report back having just revisited the options that you had looked at initially, and also determined about whether or not there were any potentially new industry developments for further consideration.
Thanks. And the resourcing on that, would that be within the current envelope that's there for year one?
Yes, we do it within existing resources.
Thank you. My other question, probably to officers, is around the 480 million figure and what that would mean in terms of consentability vis-a-vis the current BPO.
Again, through the chair, I guess that the conversations that we've had to this point is that until we have a consent, it's pretty hard to start designing and building and getting more accurate costs on the project as well, which has been part of the, I think part of the issue that you've all experienced all of the way through this has been able to go, this is what our consent is, this is then what it is that we need to build, and this is the land we need to purchase, and therefore the infrastructure that we might need to be put in place around that as well. So there's this 480 million is going back to the 2021 report that was provided to you. It includes land purchase and looks at the capital cost of the plant at that particular point in time.
Thanks. So is that saying that it's somewhat unknown the effect that this would have on consentability?
No, because that's effectively what this is the dollar amount. It doesn't impact consentability from my read of it and chatting with officers about that. So this number is based on the BPO option that you have already selected. Obviously, recommendation 2 asks to go back and have a think about whether or not there is another option that might have reduced the costs overall, and then for us to bring something back to you.
Thank you. Finally, then, to understand around the second half of this, would that reinvestigation include some of the conversations that were had about, potentially pumping things from one district to another, or is it really just reopening the question within Palmerston North City?
No, I think that what will happen is that potentially what we would look at there is, are there any other new options that could be presented that weren't in the initial 11 that were presented back in 2021, to see if there are other alternatives than the ones that you selected. So the intention would be to bring that back. In terms of timeframes, so just to give you an indication of timeframes, if council chose to select a different option, then we are probably likely to be into at least 18 months of revisiting and undertaking assessments in order to get a new consent in a different manner. So there are some risks associated with it. However, you're not at that point at this stage. Is that it's simply saying to go back, or asking to go back and have a look and see if there are some alternative options that might reduce the cost of the project.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Harpiter.
I'd like to propose an amendment.
Yes.
So I'd like to change the 480 million to 400 million, and it be including inflation. And I've got a seconder. It's Councillor Bowen.
All right, we'll just get it up. Councillor Brown. All right. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, thank you. As we all know, we had many submissions on the affordability of this, and many people told us they couldn't afford the way it was, and so it's 647 million as a price tag, and then the extra 1,000 per household, which was put into the papers. So we have to do something about that. That's what many people asked us to do something about this. So we've got to do better, and this is what we, the Mayor putting 480 forward is good, but I think 400 is better for us, and I understand where the Chief Executive's coming from with his answering of those questions, but I want to test the room to see if we can do it at 400 million rather than 480 million. So I just think that our community needs us to try and do things differently, and I know that it will make us, and you said it'll be 18 months to do a new consent. I understand that it'll trigger a new process, and that will be, but we haven't even got a consent yet anyway. So that is going to take us a while to get the consent because that we haven't even got. So it's something we need to test the room on, but we've got to make this affordable for our whole community because we haven't got it yet. We haven't got the right price point yet for our whole community. And I know that's going to bring up a whole lot of things for all of us. And Councillor Barrett's questions were very good questions, but we have to get the right price point for our community because at the moment it's not the right price point. And that's what we've got to try and test. Thank you.
All right. Councillor Hancock, we're just speaking to the amendment.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I can't support this, and I'm actually quite happy with the second part of it. But the first part of it, when you put a price on it, which has no foundation of any principle that sort of underpins it, I just don't understand that. It ignores the process that we've been through so far. It ignores technical inputs into the process. It challenges our consultation that we've undertaken to date. And it undermines the integrity of business processes. And it risks our relationship with iwi and other stakeholders. So for those reasons, I can't support it as it stands. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
I've got a couple of questions first, Mr. Mayor, if that's okay. If we had to go back and go through this process again, what are the sunk costs? What have we lost?
Through the chair, there would have been potentially, while again it depends again on what option might be selected. If you chose a different option, then some of the reports and technical reports that may have been done may have been saved. But however, if we were to say that none of that work could be used again, and I'm just going to check, but I'm suggesting it's around about $5.5 million.
Okay. And what effect would, and this is to officers, I suppose, what effect would a decision to limit the budget, whether that be 480 or 400 or any other figure that might be pulled out of a hat, quite frankly, what effect would that have on the consenting process that we're in now?
Through the chair, I would suggest that it probably will have minimal impact on the consenting process because the actual dollar amount and actual build costs are yet to come.
So how are we able then to determine what the end cost will be? I mean, how does passing a resolution to say it won't be any more than 400 million make it magically 400 million? That's what I don't understand.
through the chair, so I don't know the answer to that question. That proposal around 400 million has been put up as a recommendation here. What the original one at 480 was the numbers that were provided in a report to council back in 2021.
But won't costs have gone up since then?
Correct. So the reason why in the LTP proposal was for 647 million because it had inflated costs from 2021.
I mean, surely if we apply a figure from 3 years ago, it's not going to... how can I put this? How is that figure that we were given in 2021, if we apply that today, going to achieve the same outcomes?
I'll just check whether or not Mike might be able to help on this one.
Thank you. Mike Monahan, Group Manager for Three Waters. Councillor, I think the response to that would be that the current application would need to have some challenge to the current scope and some value engineering to be able to achieve the figures that is being proposed.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll just have a comment then, briefly, if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I'm not going to support the amendment. There's no basis that I can see for a figure of 400 million other than people would like it to be 400 million or maybe 300 million or maybe $10 only. So just wishing it were 400 million isn't going to make it magically 400 million. I might be prepared to support the 480 if there's some evidence in fact for coming up with 480 and staff seem to think that that is a doable figure. I don't deny that the project is challenging in terms of affordability, but us wishing it to be less than it is and just coming up with a figure, I'm beyond speechless, to be honest, at how that could even happen. In terms of how the process that we've been through, in terms of the consultation, in terms of the decisions that have been made, ultimately it needs to come out to a best practicable option that is affordable, because if it's not affordable, it's not the best practicable option. But at the same time, I don't really see that just coming up with a figure and saying it will now be this has got any basis in reality. So I'm sorry, I won't be supporting the amendment. I might be persuadable to supporting the 480, but really, just because there are difficulties with affording this project, now that Three Waters has been canned and we're into local water done well, isn't a reason to start making up figures and pretending that it's going to be less than it actually is.
Look, I'll just make a comment around the amendment. And look, I can understand that people want to get some surety and put a line in the sand, but I do think that it will trigger a whole lot of stuff, which my original recommendation doesn't. So I can't support it because of that, but I do understand why people are trying to get some costs. And I'll leave. There does need to be some value engineering in this. Anyway, I'll speak more to my. If this fails, I'll come back to my one. But this will see some sunk costs. There'll be a new consent. The stakeholder relationships, the thing that I'm a little bit worried about. Well, actually not a little bit worried about. I'm hugely worried about, because I lead the group. I've got to front it. I've got to go and front up at the Marae, at Shannon and down at Foxton and have a discussion, and that's going to be difficult. The 481 is actually working within numbers that we were given, There is some contingency in these numbers. I just didn't pluck them out of the air. But yeah, anyway, we'll come back to that if this fails. Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I ask some questions before I make comment too? I understand in the breakdown of the 647, am I correct through you, Mr. Mayor, that the contingency is in the vicinity of even $100 million? Is that assumption, is that correct?
I'll get one of the officers to respond.
Through the chair. So the way the capital cost in the original report to council was tabled was a capital cost at a P50 contingency was for the capital build was 387 million, but at a P95 contingency was 426.